Hello, I'm Richard Kauntze, Chief Executive of the British Council for Offices, the BCO, and welcome to episode 3 in our series of interviews we call The Office Briefing. Now, my guest today is Nicola Rutt of Hawkins Brown. So welcome, Nicola.
Hi, Richard. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you, Nicola. It's great to have you with us, and thank you very much for kindly agreeing to spend some time with me this morning. For those who may not know, let me tell you a little bit about Nicola. She's an architect by training and a partner at Hawkins Brown, where she leads the workplace sector. She's passionate, I think it'd be absolutely fair to say, about the reuse of buildings with the aim of bringing underused and perhaps unloved property back to life. Nicola had a central role on Here East, that extraordinary building, 1.2 million square feet of tech campus at the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park in London, which of course won the BCO's National Award for Best Refurbishment Recycled Workplace in 2018. And Nicola's current projects include the Printworks in Canada Water, which is that extraordinary building, as some of you may know, where the Daily Mail used to be printed and is now used for, I suppose, what we would have called discos in the old days, but not anymore, gigs or raves or whatever they are. But I'm too old for that sort of thing now. But anyway, it's going to be repurposed into something else. And that's also something we might come to in due course. So let's get straight to questions. And my first theme, Nicola, is your mantra, which is refurbishment. So to kick off, the BCO's national judges described Here East, your project, and I quote, as an exceptional solution. So what's the secret of a great refurbishment?
I think the secret of a great refurbishment begins with a great client with a really clear vision. I think the ability to be nimble and to adapt to change is another really important factor. And I think the third thing is having a kind of almost intimate knowledge of the building. And so if I just go into a little bit more detail about each of those, in terms of a great client with a great vision, you referred to Here East. What an amazing project to be involved in. And the client there did have a very clear vision from the outset, and that became our kind of guiding light through the whole project. And that took us, we're the architects, Hawkins Brown were the architects, but we were one of a much broader team, of course. And actually, the vision was formed, almost before we came on board, and we worked with that vision alongside other consultants, other creative consultants, Polk and Deanne & Co, and carried that through from the macro scale, 1.2 million square foot, and the spaces in between, to the micro. So it was a real sort of, architects like to refer to district to doorknob, and I think that applied on that building because we had the clear vision, but it also applies on smaller scale buildings. It's not about the size, it's about the kind of ethos and having that vision. I think in terms of adaptability, I always say old buildings bite back. We know that there's an inherent risk in working on refurbishment projects. You need to have, nerves of steel. And I think the ability for the team to adapt to these uncertainties that come through during the course of a refurbishment project is also really important. And then on my third and final point really is about this kind of intimate knowledge of the building. I think refurbishments have more soul than new buildings. You have to have a forensic knowledge of the building. You have to be on site a lot. You have to understand its quirks. And for us as architects, I think we need to go in and the first thing you do is really kind of try and understand the spirit of the building. How does that building feel? It's not just about the kind of the fabric. You need to work out what's special about that building. It could be volume in the case of the Printworks and Here East. It could be amazing volumes. It could be amazing details, materials, and then it's about enhancing what's special about the building. In some cases, there aren't really many special attributes to the building. It might be a kind of fairly dull building, and then it's incumbent on us to bring that magic and you know, think about how we can add delight and surprise to buildings that maybe are less inspiring to begin with.
Very interesting, Nicola. And I love your phrase, the spirit of the building. I think there's an awful lot there. And as you said, even in a building that perhaps aesthetically doesn't have that much, and I'm thinking of the print works in Canada Water, it's an extraordinary space. And what it actually, you know, there's something about it. I remember when Roger Madeline very kindly gave me a tour around, it must be 2 years or so ago now, quite a long time, when British Land bought that site. And there is something extraordinary about that building, which I suppose is why it has worked well for its current use. But let's see what happens to it. But I'll move on, if I may, staying with refurbishment. But in recent years, you've been a champion, you know, as we've discussed, of the reuse of industrial buildings and business parks. But I want to take it a bit further. And more generally, what do you think the future of refurbishment looks like?
I think the future of refurbishment is going to have to focus on getting to zero carbon as quickly as possible. And I know that doesn't apply just to refurbishment, but it applies as much to refurbishment as new buildings. I think the days of saying, it's all right, we're refurbishing the building, it's already sustainable, that's not good enough anymore. We need to think about everything we bring to a refurbishment project. Yes, we might be retaining a lot of the existing building, but the rest of what we bring to it has to be, you know, as sustainable as possible. We have to think about the future use of the building. We need to think about the life cycle of the materials we're using. So all of those factors apply equally to refurbishments as to new builds. I also think that it's really interesting that recently you've had two major refurbishment projects or architects who focus on refurbishment projects winning major prizes. So, such as Lokaal. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Lokaal is in Tilburg in the Netherlands, and it won the World Architecture Festival Prize for Best Building in the World. And it is essentially a locomotive hall that's been converted into a public library and has become a community space for the town. More recently, the Pritzker Prize has just been won by L'Aquitaine Vassal, who's a French architecture practice, and they focus on transforming buildings using a kind of real economy of means. So it's a light touch refurbishment approach, which very much focuses on the end user, and they think very carefully about access to outdoor space, to quality of light for the end users. They think about quality of air, and for these architects and for this building to win such major prizes, I think says a lot about the direction that you know, refurbishments are taking, and particularly in a sort of post-COVID era, those considerations about access to external space and so on are becoming so much more important to us.
Very interesting, and I absolutely agree on light and air. I mean, so crucial, and particularly at the moment, clearly a lot of comment about fresh air and the need for fresh air, but the capacity to get out and to sort of connect with nature, enormously important. And you mentioned net zero, and the whole carbon debate is obviously crucial, Nicola, at the moment for all kinds of reasons. And sustainability is my next broad theme, if I may. And despite the need to maximize the opportunities for refurbishment, and I think we'd all agree on that, it won't always be a realistic option, and perhaps especially for offices in many instances. So accepting that qualification, what more does the office industry need to do to become more sustainable?
I read a really interesting statistic. I think it was in the BCO, one of the last BCO reports about adaptive reuse, which was saying that 80% of UK buildings that will be occupied in 2050 have already been built. So we know there's going to be a lot more refurbishment coming through. In terms of new buildings, I think a lot of the same principles will apply. So I think we need to embrace mixed use. I know we're talking about offices, but we need to think about the future flexibility of buildings a lot more carefully. So when we're designing new buildings, new office buildings, we need to be thinking about their future uses, future refurbishments. I mean, one of the examples, maybe the white collar factory, you know, where it's kind of built as almost like a modern day warehouse. So working to get the frame right, working to get the floor to ceilings height, the floor to ceiling heights right, and building in accommodation for those buildings to become, you know, maybe part office, part laboratory, part office, part education. We did that at Here East. We do, you know, we're looking at refurbishment projects in that way, and I think more and more we're looking at new buildings that way. And I think as well there's something about the materials, Richard, in relation to sustainability. I can imagine, I can see in the future maybe a reduction in the amount of curtain wall glazing we're using. I think just people's perception of what a modern office looks like will change. We've talked before about this access to external space. I can see a lot more buildings that take that more seriously and have a more generous external spaces up and throughout the building. And I also think, you know, if this is going to be customer driven, and you know, future tenants are going to be insisting that the space they move into is sustainable and environmentally responsible.
I'm sure you're right, Nicola, and that, you know, that the demand from the ultimate client, you know, the occupier, will be for a first-class product across the board, and not least in terms of the use of materials and energy and all the rest of it. And that loose fit flexibility fundamental is only going to grow in importance, because repurposing buildings as things change, and we're in the middle of course, this extraordinary global experiment of people generally not being in offices, will be part of that. And I want to come on, Nicola, if I may, to the sort of the broad theme of the future of the office. And over the last year of the coronavirus, there's been understandably much talk about the future of the office, and some quite extreme views. And some commentators are pressing the case for local and regional offices, while others have come out pretty firmly in the belief that city centres will revive fully and will go back to a similar pattern to before. So what do you think, Nicola, the future holds for the location of the office?
You mentioned business parks earlier, and it's quite interesting. Over the last year, I've seen an increase in inquiries and projects that we're looking at on out of town business parks, retail parks, research and science parks. So I think there's definitely these large developments, many of which were developed in the kind of late 80s, early 90s, that are ready for a reboot. And the things we've talked about in terms of sustainability, a focus on health and well-being, a focus on end user driven design and environment, the experience of being in the workplace is going to transform these out of town places. I think there will still be a drive to come back to the city centre. I can't see that going away. I think the one thing that's been taken away from us in the last year is human connection, and that's what we're craving. And the buzz of the city, the kind of life support of the city, the culture, the bars, the restaurants, we haven't had that for a year. And I think instinctively, I think there's going to be a big swing back to that. Everyone I speak to is dying to get back to the city. They miss the buzz. I think that we will be working in a hybrid way, no doubt. People will be spending more time working from home in some capacity, but I don't see the city centres dying out at all. And I'm definitely in the camp of, bring on the roaring 20s. Let's not be sitting in front of our, in our extensions every day for the rest of our lives. Thanks.
I think we're all in that camp, Nicola, and this can't end soon enough. I think for most of us, and this third lockdown has been particularly grueling. And I'm with you. I mean, I think there will be changes, and the kind of the buzz phrase at the moment has become hybrid working, and I think that's probably right. But it's just a sort of a more flexible approach, and in many ways a more intelligent approach and this came through in a chat I had with Rory Sutherland the other day, in terms of getting rid of the peak loadings on trains, and actually people using their time in the office in a more sensible way. But the draw of the city centre, that collection of villages, that desire to be with other people and to link businesses and so forth, I can't see that going away, and rightly so. I think people will want that, but they'll just approach why they're in the city centre perhaps in a more rational way than feeling they always have to be there all of the time. But I'm going to move on, if I may, Nicola, because I'm conscious of time, to my penultimate question, which is interiors. So stepping through the door, and when we do we get back and we step through the office door, in the coming years, how do you see the design of the interior of the workplace changing as a result of the coronavirus pandemic?
I think a lot has been written about this. I think it's going to change. I think it's going to be less about the look, and I'm more interested in the feel. I think there's been a sequential increase in density of office space over the last few decades. We've been working in closer and closer counters with each other, and I think that's going to relax, and I think offices are going to feel more generous in terms of the space when you walk in. In terms of the look, I suspect there's going to be more of a focus on sustainable materials. I think there's going to be more zones within the office, so that we'll probably get rid of all the rows of desks, to be honest, or maybe they will be put to one side. But I think there's going to be more focus on acoustics, on providing spaces for people to have some quiet time or to go off and do their Teams meetings. But the acoustics are going to have to greatly improve. I was going into the office, in between lockdowns, and one of the things that I really noticed was how noisy it was, even with fewer people, but people, shouting at their screens or into their microphones on Teams. So a softening of the space through fabrics, biophilia, planting, again, to help soften the space and improve acoustics. And I think, different architects and interior designers will have their own different approaches. But yeah, I think more generous, lighter, and a sort of focus on softer materials and, different zones for different activities.
I can see that absolutely, and I think in many ways densities were being pushed too far, and cramming those sort of those big floor plates with rows of desks packed together and so forth, and giving people more space. And as you say, the noise issue is significant, and that kind of private space, again, it's come through in earlier discussions. There's sort of the lurch that was made from cellular to open plan, with cellular being seen to be always bad and open plan seen to be always good. And I think a much more nuanced, subtle approach will, taking account of what people actually want and what works for them, must be the right way to approach this in the years ahead, rather than having a rigid formula.
I think another thing, Richard, to consider is that companies, your base, your headquarters, your office is the place that reflects your company's culture and attitude and DNA. And you can't really do that on Teams. And I think that's something that will be reinforced now. People will be thinking much more about, what's that first experience like of walking through the door into your space? How do we really express our culture and our way of working when we welcome clients back into our offices and our colleagues, engineers and so on?
I'm sure that's right, and it has to be a place where everyone who is there has a sense of pride, but also a place where you want to be, and as you say, somewhere where you want to bring your colleagues and friends from outside the business itself. But we are almost out of time, but I've got one more, if I may, Nicola, to finish in the sort of Trevor McDonald way of and finally, and this is my sort of wrap up question, which is, what are you looking forward to most when you return to the workplace?
I'm looking forward to people. I'm just looking forward to being with people. I'm looking forward to, spreading drawings out, pinning up on the wall, getting the models out, all those three-dimensional physical things that we've done our best with on Teams and Zoom, but there's nothing like that immediate process of sitting down with colleagues, going through drawings, pointing things out. We did a survey quite recently across the whole of 300 odd people at Hawkins Brown to gauge how people felt about coming back to the office, to think about how we're going to adopt hybrid working and adapt our offices to suit. And one of the questions was, what do you miss most about the office? And a lovely answer was people, pubs and hugs. That says it all, really.
People, pubs and hugs.
I don't know who said that, Richard, but I just thought it was lovely.
Well, it's a good one. I like that very much. That's a great strapline for any business. And it's funny because pubs came out as a question or in my last interview, and never underestimate the importance of the pub. It's crucial. And yes, I'm sure you're right. And I think most of us are very, very keen to get back to that. The virtual world definitely has its limitations, even though it can obviously produce all kinds of advantages. But sadly, we are out of time, Nicola. It's been an enormous pleasure. I'm very grateful to you. It's been a fascinating chat. So thank you very much again.
Thank you, Richard. Lovely to see you. Hopefully we'll all be together, sitting in a pub or around the table soon, speaking in person.
Well, indeed so. Thank you, Nicola. It's been a real pleasure. I'm very grateful to you. Thank you all very much for watching this interview. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. And until next time, from Nicola and from me, thank you very much and goodbye.